Welcome you all for a critical analysis of psychology and literature by Carl Jung. Carl Jung. Carl Jung is a Swiss psychiatrist and one of the founding fathers of modern depth psychology. Jung's works have been influential not only in psychiatry but also in anthropology, literature, philosophy, and religious studies. Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, wanted him to be his potential heir to carry on his thoughts of psychoanalysis. The two men collaborated, and though primarily a disciple of Freud, Jung later had founded his own school of psychological study and worked alone. Jung's break with Sigmund Freud is one of the famous stories in the early history of psychoanalytic thought. Jung considers the Freudian concept of individual or personal consciousness as incomplete and unnecessarily negative. So he proposed a second and far deeper level of the unconscious, which he called collective unconsciousness. Along with Freud's personal unconscious, Jung felt that he had discovered evidence for a collective unconscious shared by all human beings. It is in some aspect a response to Freud's psychoanalysis. While Freud believed literature to be an expression of the repressed conflicts and desires of the author, Jung regarded literature as an expression of the collective unconscious. Jung believed that human beings are connected to each other and their ancestors through a shared set of experiences or racial memories. We use this collective unconscious to give new strength to the psyche of the culture as a whole. The essay, Psychology and Literature, is one of the finest documents in the field of psychology and thus having a great significance. The essay is notable for its ambitious attempt to discuss the social role of a creative writer from a psychological and psychoanalytical perspective. This essay has deep psychological concerns of Jung regarding the interconnection of psychology and literature. Jung justifies psychology for studying literature because all thought and expression are derived from the human psyche. Psychology can be brought to study literature because the human psyche is the womb of all sciences and arts. Yes, according to Jung, the science and art have a common origin called human psyche. Let me ask a question. Why is literature important to psychology? A literary work benefits from psychology in terms of successfully presenting characters, expressing their moods, and bringing the reader into the psychological dimension of human reality. There is no doubt both psychology and study of literature meet their focus on emotions and human soul. Jung notes that there is a basic or primary difference between literary critic and psychologist. For example, the psychological novel may not be preferred by the psychologist, as the novel explains itself. In other words, it may be the most uninteresting one, as most of the elements of the fiction, like motives or thoughts of the characters, are explained and are made explicit by the author. The more interesting novels for a psychologist would be the works where these things are not explained and made explicit by the author, as there is a room for interpretation. Jung takes Goethe's fast to explain his points further. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe was an 18th century German poet, playwright, and novelist. He is the most influential writer in the German language, and his tragic play Faust is in two parts, known in English as Faust Part 1 and Faust Part 2. The play Faust is considered by many to be Goethe's masterpiece and the greatest work of German literature. Goethe has stated everything clearly in the beginning of the play. The psychologist has nothing more to add, but the picture changes when we come to the second part of the drama. Here nothing is self-explanatory. Every line adds to the difficulty, and the reader finds hard to understand without interpretation. Jung divides the work of art into two modes, the psychological mode and the visionary mode. The psychological mode. In this psychological mode, everything is explained so clearly that the psychologist has very little task to perform. Psychological mode of art deals with material drawn from human consciousness, such as moral lessons of life, the emotional setbacks, the experience of passion, and crisis of human destiny. These experiences are treated by the literary writer in a creative manner, and the reader succeeds in getting the better insights into the life. Thus, the psychologist would hardly be interested in psychological literature, which deals with the material drawn from conscious mind. The visionary mode. Visionary mode draws its imagery, content, from materials drawn from unconscious mind, and hence is of great interest to a psychologist. It arises from the timeless depth and is unknown, cold, many-sided, and fantastic. It is sudden in mystery. History and mythology are taken to be its material. We experience the psychological mode through our feelings, which are obvious, but the visionary mode is experienced through our feelings, which are mysterious and weird. The visionary artist must make use of imagery which is not easy to handle and easy to understand. Jung points out that the first part of God is Fast is an example of psychological mode, while the second part is visionary in nature. Examples of visionary mode are Dante's Divine Comedy, William Blake's poems, and Herman Melville's Moby Dick, and the second part of God is Fast as well. Jung rejects Freudian emphasis on the personality of the author because Freudian approach cannot understand the function of a creative writer in the society. Jung notes that the materials of literature are not drawn from psychosexual history, as Freud would insist, but rather the materials are from racial memory or the collective unconscious of the entire human race. Such materials or contents of collective unconscious are called archetypes by Jung. Jung gives an example of the figure of cross, which becomes a sacred symbol among the Christians, or swastika like among Hindus. According to Jung, the author's personality is not the most important aspect of a literary work, because in a literary work, the writer has to transcend the personal and the subjective in order to make his work appealing to others. Jung believes that the more one's individual life enters a piece of work, the less artistic it becomes. Thus, an artist or author is a collective man, one who carries and shapes the unconscious psychic life of whole mankind. Thus, according to Jung, creative artists should express the contents of collective unconscious in a society. Such writer or the author has to sacrifice happiness and everything that makes life worth living for the ordinary human being. The author has to suffer because of the divine gift of creative fire in him. Jung concludes by comparing a great piece of art to a dream. Jung also states that the artist is creating and living as a member of the human race rather than the individual that is speaking to humanity. Thus, according to Jung, a great work of art is comprised of collective unconscious. This collective unconscious will assist the artist in the process of individuation. Thank you.